Look at what is happening right now to American farmers. Shipments of almonds, dairy products, soybeans, and corn that once went to China by the ton are now stuck at home, gathering dust in warehouses. What used to be a steady flow of goods has turned into mountains of unsold harvest, and Beijing's message is crystal clear. Trump's protectionist trade war is hitting U.S. farmers the hardest. In Washington state, hay exporters are laying off workers because Chinese buyers have simply stopped coming. These aren't just dry numbers in a report. They are real families losing contracts, paychecks, and the future they've been building for years. And the problem isn't drought, flooding, or a bad season. Farmers did everything right. They planted the fields, harvested the crops, prepared the products, but when it came time to sell, the customers were gone. China, once the largest buyer of American agricultural goods, has shut its doors. Add to that unpredictable weather and rising costs, and the situation goes from bad to catastrophic. Every container idling in a port, every farmer left unpaid triggers a chain reaction. Truck drivers, processors, local banks, and entire rural communities that depend on agriculture are all taking the hit. So, let's see how fast this shock is spreading across the Farm Belt. How much damage has already been done, and why doesn't Washington have a real plan to save farmers? Until very recently, shipments to China were steady. The system was far from perfect, but at least there was a reliable buyer. Everything changed after Trump imposed new tariffs in April 2025. In just 6 weeks, U.S. agricultural exports to China were cut in half. This isn't a minor hiccup, it's billions of dollars worth of goods with no market. In California's Central Valley, almonds that used to be loaded straight onto ships are now sitting in storage after Chinese importers unilaterally canceled contracts. At the Port of Oakland, the story is the same. Almond and dairy exports have fallen by more than 40%. These aren't forecasts or slogans. They are hard numbers showing that China pulled out of the market almost overnight. And the real problem is there's simply no one to replace such a buyer. Europe already has a surplus of its own products. Southeast Asia can take some, but in volumes far too small. So what happens to the tons of milk, soybeans, corn, and almonds when there are no buyers? The harvest spoils, milk is dumped, silos overflow, losses mount, and farmers burdened with loans and high expenses are drowning in debt. This isn't the problem of one crop or one region. It's a chain reaction across the entire farm economy. From California to Iowa, every shipment that doesn't leave port pushes entire communities closer to collapse. The situation is so dire that farmers across the Midwest are openly demanding that Trump strike some kind of deal with China, any deal, just to reopen the market. For them, it's no longer about politics or pride, but survival. But how did this all begin? The roots lie in Washington and Trump's campaign of sweeping tariffs. In April 2025, his administration slapped Chinese imports with duties of up to 145%, calling it a strike against unfair trade. But Beijing's response was immediate and precise. Retaliatory tariffs on American farm goods aimed squarely at Trump's political base. Economists had warned this would happen. China didn't hesitate to hit back. But more importantly, Beijing used the moment to accelerate a broader strategy. It didn't just walk away from American products, it reshaped global trade flows. As soon as U.S. soybean and corn exports stopped, Brazil and Argentina stepped in, signing new contracts and sending ships to Chinese ports. Australia ramped up its dairy and beef exports. Instead of disruptions, China built new long-term supply lines. For Washington, the consequences go far beyond falling sales. Farmers who had spent decades building access to the Chinese market lost it overnight. For Beijing, meanwhile, the crisis became an opportunity to deepen ties with South America, strengthen BRICS alliances, and present itself as a more reliable partner than the United States. That is why this imbalance matters so much. In agriculture, it is the buyer who decides which countries thrive and which are left behind, and China is the buyer. By choosing South America over the U.S., Beijing is making it clear that American farmers are no longer indispensable in the global supply chain. What we are witnessing in 2025 is not a temporary slump, but a structural shift. The Farm Belt has become the epicenter of a geopolitical contest, and the longer Washington clings to tariffs, the more entrenched this new reality becomes. When China cut off imports of U.S. agricultural goods, it didn't wait for shortages to appear. Beijing moved fast, decisively, and on a massive scale. U.S. farmers were instantly replaced by Brazil, Argentina, and other South American producers. Within just a few months, they became the new pillars of China's food supply chain. Take soybeans. China consumes more than 60% of the world's soybeans, and for years was heavily dependent on American supplies. But as soon as tariffs and tensions escalated, Beijing shifted almost entirely to the south. In 2023, Brazil shipped more than 54 million tons of soybeans to China, nearly three-quarters of its total imports. By August 2025, Brazil's share had soared to 90%. American shipments, once critical to China's food security, have all but vanished. The fallout for the U.S. is devastating. Grain silos across the Midwest are overflowing, prices are collapsing, and farmers are left without markets. The same story is playing out with beef, corn, dairy, and even poultry. Argentina and Uruguay have ramped up meat exports, while Brazil has become not just China's main soybean supplier, but also its top corn exporter after Beijing authorized purchases in 2022. China has poured billions of dollars into South American agriculture to ensure reliability. In Brazil, railways were expanded, ports modernized, and new cold storage facilities built. Much of it financed by Chinese loans or joint ventures. Beijing wasn't just buying food, it was constructing an entirely new logistics system designed to function without the U.S. Every ship of soy leaving Santos or Paranagua for China carries not only grain, but proof that the United States is no longer indispensable. And the partnership goes far beyond agriculture. China has become the largest foreign investor in Latin America's oil sector, tying itself closely to Venezuela, Brazil, and Ecuador. In Peru and Chile, Chinese companies control some of the world's largest copper mines, supplying the factories and renewable energy industries back home. Highways, power grids, and railroads across the continent increasingly bear the stamp of Chinese corporations through belt and road financing. All of this fits into the political framework of BRICS. Brazil is pushing hard for the bloc's expansion. Venezuela and Bolivia openly back the vision of a multipolar world led by rising economies. For South American governments, China is not just a stable buyer, but also a source of development without the political conditions usually attached by the U.S. or the IMF. Meanwhile, Washington is losing not just contracts, but influence in a region it once considered its backyard. The numbers speak for themselves. By 2022, China had already overtaken the U.S. as South America's largest trading partner with annual trade exceeding $500 billion. And that figure keeps rising. It's not just about soybeans or copper anymore, but also about technology, 5G networks, and even military cooperation. For American farmers, the issue is no longer just empty silos. What's at stake is the balance of power across the entire Western Hemisphere. BRICS has become the institutional framework for these shifts, giving South America a platform to challenge Western dominance. With each passing year, Washington is losing not just revenue, but also trust, partnerships, and strategic ground in a region where its authority once seemed unshakable. On the ground in Iowa or Washington state, every farm closure and every layoff is a reminder that this crisis is structural, not temporary. The markets lost today will not return. Trump talks about patriotic farming and sacrifice for future victory, but for those staring at mounting debts and unsold crops, there is no reward on the horizon. The checks from Washington barely cover expenses. They are bandages on a wound that keeps getting deeper, and everything in rural America is a reminder of that fact. While trade routes are closing, another blow is coming from the banks. Credit that once kept farms afloat has dried up. Financing for seeds, equipment repairs, machinery, or land purchases has been sharply cut. Banks see the same numbers everyone else does. Without stable exports, farmers cannot repay their loans. A vicious cycle takes hold. Farmers cannot borrow to plant, cannot sell their harvest, and so cannot keep their farms running. A wave of bankruptcies begins, hitting family farms first, weighed down by debts from which there is no escape. And as farmers struggle under the weight of collapsed exports and vanishing credit, another crisis is bearing down on them from within the country itself. Even those who manage to hold on to their land face a different problem: not enough workers to bring in the harvest. U.S. agriculture has always relied heavily on migrant labor, especially from Mexico and Central America. These workers take on the hardest jobs without which the system simply cannot function: harvesting lettuce in California's Central Valley, tending dairy herds in Wisconsin, or working long shifts in Arkansas poultry plants. Without them, much of America's food chain simply cannot operate. But Trump's tougher immigration policies have cut this workforce at the very moment farmers were already suffering from export collapse. Stricter border controls and reduced visa programs almost instantly dried up the labor flow. Instead of helping, the administration only intensified the pressure by driving out the very people who were keeping the sector afloat. Farmers found themselves caught in a perfect storm. Abroad, there are no buyers. At home, there are no hands to work. And from Washington, there is no real support. Farms that survived decades of natural disasters and price swings now face collapse not because of nature, but because of policy. If nothing changes, the fall of America's Farm Belt will go down in history not as an unavoidable tragedy, but as a man-made catastrophe. And to stay updated on these developments, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.